Vamos lá, gente, sejam bem-vindos aí a mais um vídeo, né? E se vocês que estão me assistindo gostam de assuntos como filosofia, cristianismo e teologia, você está no lugar certo. Mas vamos lá, gente. O vídeo de hoje é muito interessante e eu vou colocar o vídeo do grande teólogo e filósofo atual, Jhon Lennox. Esse cara já debateu com ateus famosos como Richard Dawkins, dentre outros. Ele é um grande estudioso, né, lá da Faculdade de Oxford. Nesse vídeo eu vou colocar a tradução para vocês verem como é que ele está argumentando sobre a existência de Deus. Mas já adianto a vocês que a forma como ele fala sobre Deus, sobre a moralidade, é uma forma muito impressionante. E nesse vídeo em específico, que eu separei para vocês, o Jhon Lennox ele vai estar falando sobre como nós conseguimos conciliar Deus e o mal que há no mundo. Existem muitas pessoas que fazem essa pergunta: ora, se Deus existe, por que há tanto mal no mundo? Por que Deus não impede com que o mal ele seja praticado? E eu já adianto a vocês que vale muito a pena ver a argumentação dele. Vou soltar o vídeo dele e no final eu volto para a gente bater um papo rapidinho para a gente conversar sobre isso. Vamos lá.
I'll never forget meeting two brilliant Israeli scientists, and we were chatting and they discovered I believed in God, and they said, look, we don't believe in God. And I said, why don't you? And they said, we're not going to tell you because we don't want to upset your faith. Well, I said, that's very kind of you, but if my faith is upset by that, then it's not worth believing in. And in the end, they told me. They said they read out loud to one another, and they were reading a book by the Israeli Nobel Prize winner, Bashevis Singer, Nobel Prize for Literature. And in the book, he described how some Jewish women and children were buried alive in Russia. And they said to me, the light went out. I can forgive God anything, but not that. Now let me make clear, ladies and gentlemen, my heart goes out to people like that. Many of my colleagues in Oxford are atheists in part because of this kind of thing. I've stood personally in Auschwitz many times, and I've wept every time. It goes very deep, and there are no easy, simplistic answers. But nevertheless, I think there is a way into something that can give us real hope. I understand the atheist reaction, and yet I have a problem with it as I observe it from outside. If there is no God, where do the concepts of good and evil that we all possess come from? Because outrage against the evils in the world presupposes a standard of good that's objectively real and independent of us. But if there is no transcendence, no God, then how can there be such an objective standard of good? And if there's no moral evil or good in any case, the concept of ethics disappear and moral outrage is absurd. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this very clearly. And he pointed out that the death of God would mean the death of compassion, kindness, and forgiveness. I quote, when one gives up Christian belief, one therefore deprives oneself of the right to Christian morality. Christian morality is a command. Its origin is transcendental. It possesses truth only if God is truth. It stands or falls with belief in God. Why morality at all, when life, nature, history are non-moral? And Richard Dawkins, interestingly, agrees with him. He writes, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. And we dance to its music. Ladies and gentlemen, that's correct. The terrorists who flew the jets into the Twin Towers were simply dancing to the music of their DNA, and therefore you cannot blame him. Now notice exactly what Dawkins says. I've debated it with him, he's never retracted it. There is no good, there is no evil. That is the deconstruction of all morality and all moral concepts. And it seems to me he stands with Nietzsche here, and it's the logical outcome of his worldview. Ironically, though, if he believes there's no good and no evil, then what does he mean by saying 9/11 radicalized him as something so evil that it made him determined to get rid of all religion? There's a double think, of course, and there's a reason for the double think. It's an obvious one. It's the fact that we're hardwired as moral beings, whether we believe in God or not. And from a Christian perspective, that makes complete sense, because one of the central claims is that human beings are unique, made in the image of God. They're moral beings. And so no matter what worldview we espouse, we discover that we're moral beings. And that's what we're faced with, which is why Dawkins philosophically rejects good and evil, but actually is outraged by what he sees to be morally false. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, I dare to say that there are absolute moral standards. Michael Ruse, who's an atheist, says there are some things that are just wrong. Torturing babies is just wrong, ladies and gentlemen. And J.L. Mackie, who was an atheist philosopher at Oxford, said this: ethics constitutes so odd a cluster of qualities and relations that they are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. If then there are such moral values, they make the existence of a God more probable than it would have been without them. Thus we have, after all, a defensible argument from the existence of moral values to the existence of God. And so we find ourselves to be moral beings, subscribing to certain absolute standards of good and evil. Those standards, their existence is consistent with the existence of God and very difficult to explain without him. So in one sense, it's the existence of God that gives rise to the problem of evil. And that is why so many people feel, and we can understand it, can't we? Why couldn't God, if there is a God, have created us without the capacity for moral evil? Could he not have foreseen that things would go wrong and avoided it? And of course he could. Of course he could. He could have made us automata or robots. But then we would have been less than human. Robots programmed what we wanted to do would be incapable of certain things. I have a wife. I've been married 45 years. I'm glad she's not a robot. If I arrived at home and found the iPad in front of my robotic wife and it had instructions on it, kiss, and I pressed this button and I got a kiss, it wouldn't be very exciting, you know. And you laugh because you see the difference. You see the difference deep down. You wouldn't want to be like that. And the interesting thing, we find ourselves wishing for God to do something that would ultimately mean we were wishing ourselves out of existence. You couldn't have love if you can't have hate, you see. And that's the fascinating thing, that God has created a world of people in his image who are capable of the richness of love. And the very odd thing is that a lot of evil has occurred on the way to give you your existence, hasn't it? Maybe your mum and dad, oh, well, they wouldn't, you're far too young, met in a bomb shelter during World War II. And it was the evil of the bombing that led to your existence. Life is exceedingly complex and sophisticated, isn't it? And here we find ourselves in a world where we have these marvelous choices. The existential writer Jean-Paul Sartre said, "The man who wants to be loved does not want to possess an automaton. And if we want to humiliate him, we need only try to persuade him that the beloved's passion is the result of a psychological determinism." So what I'm arguing for is the very existence of the freedom to choose, and therefore the capacity for love, is inevitable if you want to create people like that. Now, we find ourselves like that. And therefore God took a risk. Of course he took a risk. I think there's some parents here. I'm a parent. I'm a grandparent. I took a risk in allowing my children to be. I knew that they could grow up to reject me. I've never met a parent yet that gave that as a reason for not having a child. because we all hope, it doesn't always turn out that way, of course, that children will grow up to love them. So, like God, we create creatures risky in its effort. And you know, we can argue till kingdom come, and we have done, and it's very interesting what a good God might do, could do, should do, and so on. We go round and round in circles, and we never solve it. So I ask a different question. Granted, ladies and gentlemen, that this experience of human life is full of ragged ends. We see some beauty. It's a bit like Coventry Cathedral. You go into it, you see that a bomb has hit it, but you can see traces of beauty. And we ask ourselves the question, is there anywhere any evidence in the universe that you can trust God with the ragged ends? That's the key question. We'll never solve them all. But is it possible to trust God with them? And this brings me to the heart of it. Christianity is unique in having at its center an absolutely stupendous concept of God becoming human. This God, said Nietzsche, who is on a cross. But let me take it seriously. Ladies and gentlemen, come with me for a moment. If this is really God, what's God doing on a cross? I'll tell you what it tells me, at least. It tells me that God has not remained distant from human suffering, but has himself become part of it. And he didn't remain on the cross. He was taken down, he was buried, and he rose again. And of course this is the key point, because the problem of evil and suffering looks very different if you live within a worldview that's got a resurrection and a life after death. I wouldn't for a moment dream of standing here if I didn't believe that Jesus Christ has broken the death barrier, and there's evidence for it, and that makes the universe look totally different. It's utterly unique, ladies and gentlemen. Christianity competes with no other religion for the simple reason that you'll find this nowhere else. And it seems to me that this is a way into the question. And I have seen its effect with many people trying to cope with suffering. I arrived in Christchurch, New Zealand 2 days after the earthquake. And I had to meet people that had lost their wives and their husbands just like that. And it was wonderful to see them begin to respond as I tried to explain that there were no simple answers, but here's a possible way in. And a little note was left for me after one such lecture. The lady was too afraid to stay. She'd lost her husband, but on the note it said this: "This is the first ray of hope I now see."
Pois é, gente, como vocês podem ver, né, é muito gratificante a forma como ele anuncia a argumentação sobre a existência de Deus, e eu acho muito interessante o argumento moral. Às vezes a gente pode perguntar, alguém pode ser bom sem acreditar em Deus? Logicamente, nós sabemos que existem ateus que praticam bondade. Então, claramente, você pode ser bom mesmo sem acreditar em Deus. Mas a pergunta profunda, como vocês viram aí Jhon Lennox argumentando, é: alguém pode ser bom sem Deus? E aqui é onde a lógica ela não consegue fazer sentido. Por quê? Vocês viram. Todas as vezes que a gente afirma que algo é errado, ou que algo é injusto, ou que o mal ele existe, automaticamente nós já estamos pressupondo que Deus ele existe. Perceba, se dentre os humanos não existe nenhum humano que seja a perfeição do bom, daquilo que é certo, ora, nós só sabemos o que é o torto se a gente tiver ciência do que é o reto. Mas como nós sabemos o que é o mal se nós não conseguimos perceber nenhum ser humano que seja perfeitamente bom? Todos os seres humanos, eles têm uma decadência. Todos nós somos falhos. Mas a gente tem a percepção de que no mundo há muita injustiça, muita maldade. Mas com base em que nós estamos dizendo que algo é bom ou mal? Perceba, Deus ele é a fonte da moralidade, como o próprio Jhon Lennox ele argumentou. Sem Deus, bem e mal torna-se relativo. Deus é a base absoluta da moralidade. Foi justamente isso que o Jhon Lennox ele quis trazer para vocês. E eu espero que esse vídeo tenha feito vocês refletir um pouco.